Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. If this festival gets any lamer, I declared, gesturing with the flimsy plastic cup that was an insult to German engineering. I'd rather put on a dress and dance the polka. It all started with a complaint, a stupid, arrogant complaint that tumbled out of my mouth fueled by lukewarm beer and a healthy dose of cynicism. If I could take it back, if I could rewind time to that sticky wooden table under the striped canvas tent, I'd have just shut up and drank my terrible beer. But I didn't. My friends laughed. Jake, ever the instigator, slapped the table. Careful what you wish for. Marcus, you've got the legs for it. Shut up, Jake, I grumbled, taking another sip of the flat, vaguely malty liquid. We were at the annual Oktoberfest celebration in our small tourist trap of a town. It was a pathetic imitation of the real thing in Munich. Everything was a cheap knockoff. The Oompa band on the stage sounded more like a high school marching band in distress, and the bratwurst had the distinct flavor of microwaved hot dogs. He's right, you know, Sarah chimed in, her eyes twinkling with mischief over the rim of her own plastic cup. She was the only one of us who had actually bothered to dress up, wearing a blue dirndl she'd bought online. It looked cute on her, but the whole charade just annoyed me. You're so cranky. Maybe you just need to get into the spirit of things. The spirit is supposed to be in the beer, Sarah, not in playing dress-up. I shot back, look at these people. I gestured around at the crowd. Men in ill-fitting lederhosen with their bony knees sticking out. Women in dirndls that looked more like Halloween costumes. It's a performance. Festivals for drinking beer, not cosplay. Chris, always the peacemaker, just shrugged. Come on, man, it's just a bit of fun. Don't be a buzzkill. I scoffed. Fun is a proper beer served in a proper glass stein. This, I held up the offending plastic cup, is a travesty. Sarah smirked, leaning forward. So why don't you try the dress? Then who knows, maybe you'd have more fun. I gave a short, dismissive laugh and raised my cup in a mock toast. The day they serve real beer here is the day I'll put on a frilly skirt and dance. And that's when she appeared. It was like a scene from a movie. The crowd seemed to part just a little, and a waitress moved through the chaos with a grace that didn't belong in this cheap festival. She had blonde hair braided into a perfect crown around her head, and her dirndl wasn't a costume. It was the real deal. Dark green velvet bodice, a crisp white blouse with puff sleeves, and a deep red apron tied neatly at her waist. But it was her eyes that caught me. They were a sharp, intelligent blue, and they were fixed directly on me, shimmering with an unreadable expression. She had heard every word. She stopped at our table, a single empty tray held at her side. Her smile was small, a little mysterious. Perhaps you just need to try the real beer. Her voice was smooth, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the thick, comical German accent some of the other staff put on. It was subtle, musical. I felt a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I was just complaining. She finished for me, her smile widening slightly. I heard plastic cups, bad music, people playing make-believe. She tilted her head, and for a second, her expression was so piercing it felt like she was looking straight through my cynical facade. Some of us take it very seriously. Jake, ever the opportunist, leaned forward. You got something better in the back for us. The waitress's eyes didn't leave mine. Not for all of you, but perhaps for the man who is willing to dance in a dress. My friends erupted in whoops and hollers. My face burned. It was a joke. I mumbled, wishing I could sink through the floorboards. Was it, she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She leaned in closer, and I could smell a faint scent of cinnamon and something earthy, like fresh rain on soil. I have a special brew. It's not for regular tourists. She gestured with her head toward the back of the festival grounds, toward a dark, unmarked service tent. Come with me, taste something that isn't a performance. My brain was screaming at me. Say no, she's making fun of you. This is a setup. But the way she looked at me, with that challenging, knowing glint in her eyes, was utterly captivating, and my friends were already pushing me, goading me on. Go on, Marcus, your big chance. Don't keep the lady waiting. Trapped between the relentless teasing of my friends and the magnetic pull of this strange, beautiful waitress, I made a decision, a stupid, fateful decision. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Fine," I said, trying to sound nonchalant, "but if it's just another keg of cheap lager, I'm coming right back." Her name, she told me as we walked away from the table, was Petra, and as I followed her away from the lights and the noise, leaving the jeers of my friends behind, I had no idea that I wasn't just going to taste a different kind of beer. I was about to leave Marcus behind, too. Petra led me away from the main festival tent, past the kitchen spewing greasy smoke and the overflowing dumpsters. We ended up in front of a large corrugated metal warehouse that looked like it hadn't been used in years. A single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow glow over a heavy wooden door. The air here was thick with the smell of damp earth and fermenting malt. It was a far cry from the cheerful, if tacky, atmosphere of the festival. "This is your secret stash?" I asked, a little nervously. The whole thing was starting to feel less like a fun prank and more like the beginning of a low-budget horror movie. Petra just smiled that enigmatic smile of hers and pushed the heavy door open. It creaked loudly, revealing a cavernous space filled with dusty barrels, stacked crates, and the ghostly shapes of old brewing equipment covered in tarps. It was a storage shed, a place for forgotten things. She gestured for me to enter. I hesitated for a moment, but the thought of going back to my friends and admitting I'd chickened out was worse than whatever was in here. I stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind me with a solid, final-sounding thud. The only light came from a string of dim, amber-colored bulbs hanging from the rafters. Petra moved with a quiet confidence through the clutter, her footsteps barely making a sound on the dusty concrete floor. She stopped at a small, sturdy wooden table in the center of the room. On it sat two items that seemed comically out of place. One was a dark glass bottle, almost black, sealed with a red wax stamp. The label was old, handwritten in a spidery German script I couldn't decipher. It looked ancient, potent. The other item was a plastic cup, a bright Pepto-Bismol pink plastic cup. I couldn't help but laugh. It was a nervous, slightly hysterical sound. A pink plastic cup for the real beer. Petra's eyes twinkled in the dim light as she carefully cracked the wax seal on the bottle. Formality sometimes gets in the way of the experience. Marcus, you said it yourself. You care more about the substance than the presentation, right? She had me there. She poured the beer, and it was nothing like the pale, fizzy stuff they were serving outside. This was a deep, rich amber color, almost the shade of honey, with a thick, creamy head. The aroma that filled the air was incredibly sweet, spicy, with notes of clove and banana bread. It smelled alive. She handed the pink cup to me. My hand trembled slightly as I took it. It felt absurd to be holding this legendary-smelling brew in such a silly vessel. "To new experiences," she said, her voice soft but clear in the quiet warehouse. I took a long drink. The first sensation was an explosion of flavor. It was complex and overwhelming. It started sweet on the tip of my tongue, a wave of honey and dark fruit. But as I swallowed, it transformed. A surprising bitterness bloomed at the back of my throat, followed by a slow creeping heat that spread down my chest, warming me from the inside out. It was the best beer I had ever tasted. "Wow," I managed to say, my voice a little hoarse. "Okay, you win. This is the real thing." Petra just watched me, her expression unreadable. "Keep drinking," she urged. "The full experience takes time." I took another deep swallow. The warmth intensified, spreading through my limbs like a pleasant fire. My body felt light, floaty. The edges of the warehouse seemed to soften, the dusty air sparkling in the dim light. I felt a wave of giddiness wash over me. She began to speak again, her voice a low, hypnotic hum that seemed to weave itself into the buzz from the beer. "You said everyone out there was in a performance, playing a role. What if you had to play a role, Marcus? What if you had to truly commit to the spirit of the festival?" "No way," I slurred, shaking my head. The room was starting to gently spin. "Not me. I'm not an actor." But as the words left my mouth, something was wrong. My voice sounded, different, higher, thinner. I cleared my throat, a strange tickle erupting into a delicate cough that lacked its usual gravelly bass. What was in this, I asked, looking from the pink cup to her, a tendril of panic starting to snake its way through the pleasant fog in my head. Petra didn't answer. She just watched me, her gaze intense. Then the sensations began to change. The pleasant warmth was becoming a strange, prickling heat. A tingle started in my fingertips and toes, a pins and needles feeling that raced up my arms and legs. I looked down at my hands, and I could have sworn they were getting smaller, the knuckles smoothing out, the fingers becoming more slender right before my eyes. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like jelly. I stumbled, catching myself on the table. A sharp, pulling ache started in my chest, a deep, painful throb right behind my sternum. It felt like my ribs were being pulled apart. I gasped, a short, breathy sound that didn't feel like my own. My shoulders seemed to narrow, my hips to widen with a subtle, grinding shift of bone that made me cry out. The pain was dizzying, but it was the strangeness of it that was truly terrifying. My whole body was in revolt, reshaping itself against my will. I looked up, my eyes wide with terror, and saw my reflection in a dusty, cracked mirror hanging on the far wall. But it wasn't me. Staring back was a stranger, a woman. Her face was pale, heart-shaped, framed by a cascade of messy blonde hair that had inexplicably replaced my own short brown crop. Her eyes. My eyes were wide with a horrified confusion. I watched as my jawline softened, my Adam's apple dissolved into a smooth, graceful throat. I was shrinking, the world seeming to grow taller around me as I settled into a new, slighter frame, maybe 5'7". The pain in my chest subsided, replaced by a tender, sensitive fullness. I looked down and saw, beneath my now baggy t-shirt, the undeniable swell of two small, firm breasts. I was a woman. The world tilted, and I would have collapsed if Petra hadn't been there suddenly, her hands gripping my minute, delicate upper arms, holding me steady. She leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. "Now," she whispered, her voice laced with something that sounded like triumph. "Do you understand what it means to get into the spirit?" My mind was a screaming chaos of denial and horror. This couldn't be happening. It was a hallucination, a dream. I was drunk, but the feeling of my body, the solid presence of Petra's hands, the dust in the air, it was all too real. Petra guided me to a wooden stool and gently pushed me down. My new body was weak, uncoordinated. She disappeared into the shadows for a moment and returned carrying a bundle of fabric. She laid it out on the table. It was a dirndl. Not just any dirndl, but one for a grown woman. It was beautiful, far more elaborate than Sarah's. There was a soft white linen chemise, a bodice of deep blue silk embroidered with tiny silver flowers, a heavy green skirt, and a shimmering pale gold apron. Beside it, she placed a pair of white stockings, simple leather shoes, and a set of delicate undergarments. "No," I whispered, the sound breathy and foreign. "No, change me back." "The performance is just beginning," she said calmly. Ignoring my plea, she picked up the lace-trimmed chemise. "We need to get you dressed." I tried to fight, to push her away, but my body wouldn't obey. It was like trying to pilot a machine I didn't have the instructions for. My limbs were weak, my movements clumsy. Petra was surprisingly strong, her grip firm but not unkind as she peeled my loose, masculine t-shirt and jeans off my strange, new body. The cool air of the warehouse hit my skin, and a full-body shiver racked me. It was the most vulnerable I had ever felt in my life. Shame and fear warred inside me. Petra worked quickly, methodically. She slid the soft chemise over my head, the linen whispering against my sensitive new skin. The sensation was so alien it made me gasp. She helped me into a pair of simple cotton panties and then the stockings, her fingers brushing against my smooth, hairless legs. Every touch was an electric shock to my shattered senses. Then came the corset. She wrapped it around my torso and began to pull the laces tight. The pressure was immense. It squeezed my waist, forcing the air from my lungs in a panicked wheeze and pushing my small, tender breasts up, creating a startling cleavage at the neckline of the chemise. My posture was instantly changed, my back forced ramrod straight. I couldn't take a full breath. I felt trapped, packaged, displayed. "Please," I begged, tears starting to well in my eyes. "Please stop." Petra paused, her hands on the laces, She looked at my tear-streaked face in the dusty mirror. Marcus was afraid to feel anything, she said softly. He hid behind sarcasm and complaints. The world was a joke to him. She gave the laces one final, firm tug. Erica has no such luxury. Erica feels everything. Erica, the name hung in the air, a death sentence for the man I had been. She helped me into the heavy skirt and the silk bodice, lacing it up snugly over the corset. Finally, she tied the golden apron around my waist, making the bow on the right side. I vaguely remembered Sarah telling me what that meant. A bow on the right meant you were taken, in a relationship, a cruel irony. She stood back to admire her work. In the mirror, a complete stranger looked back at me, a pretty, terrified girl in traditional German attire. My blonde hair was a mess, my face was pale, and my eyes were wide with a silent scream. Petra reached up and tucked a stray strand of my hair behind my ear. Attached to the hair clip was a tiny silver bell, no bigger than a pea. It let out a single, clear, melodic chime. "Listen carefully, Erica," she said, her tone serious. She picked up the pink plastic cup from the table. There was still a small amount of the amber liquid left at the bottom. If you want to go back, if you want to be Marcus again, you must drink the rest of this beer before the festival's final keg-tapping ceremony ends. That is at precisely 10:05 p.m. I stared at the cup, my heart hammering against the confines of the corset. Hope. There was a chance. "But be warned," Petra continued, her eyes dark and intense. "If you fail, if the last chime of the clock tower sounds at 10:05 and there is still beer in this cup, then the transformation will become permanent. You will be Erica forever." She pressed the cup into my trembling hand. The plastic felt slick with condensation. Then she walked to the heavy door and pulled it open. The cacophony of the festival, the blaring music, the roar of the crowd, the laughter rushed into the quiet warehouse like a tidal wave. "Your stage is waiting," Petra said. And with a gentle but firm push, she sent me stumbling out of the darkness and into the dizzying, overwhelming light of the festival. A girl named Erica with a ticking clock and a cup full of poison that was also my only cure. The world outside the warehouse was a violent assault on my new senses. The music was a physical force, a thumping polka beat that vibrated through the soles of my simple leather shoes and up into my constricted chest. The lights were blindingly bright, a chaotic swirl of neon and string lights that made my head spin. And the people, God, the people. The crowd was a dense, surging ocean of bodies. From my new, shorter perspective, everyone seemed to be towering over me. I was Erica. The name echoed in my head, a frantic mantra of disbelief. I looked down at myself. The green skirt, the golden apron, the tight blue bodice pushing up a cleavage that belonged to someone else. My hands, slender and pale, were trembling as they clutched the pink plastic cup. This was my lifeline, my only way back. 10:05 p.m. I glanced wildly around. Searching for a clock, I saw a large decorative one hanging on the main stage. The hands read 9:42. That gave me 23 minutes. 23 minutes to drink the rest of this cursed beer and find a way to reverse this nightmare. I brought the cup to my lips, my hand shaking so badly that some of the amber liquid sloshed over the side. I tilted it back, determined to down it all in one go. The moment the beer hit my tongue, my body rebelled. The flavor that had been so complex and wonderful just moments ago was now horrifically, overwhelmingly bitter. It was like drinking perfume mixed with bile. My throat seized, and I gagged, pulling the cup away with a spluttering cough. A wave of nausea washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. It was as if my new body was rejecting it. The very thing that could save me was poison to this new form. Tears of frustration welled in my eyes. I had to do this. I took a deep, shuddering breath, as deep as the corset would allow, and tried again. I managed a tiny sip, forcing myself to swallow. It burned all the way down, and my stomach churned in protest. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to stop. Suddenly, a heavy arm draped around my shoulders. I flinched, startled, and turned to see a burly man in lederhosen with a face as red as his sunburn. He grinned down at me, his breath a foul wave of sausage and stale beer. "Well, hello there. Fräulein lost, are we?" he boomed. his voice uncomfortably close to my ear. "A pretty little thing like you shouldn't be all alone." I froze. I had been looked at by men before, of course, but never like this, not with that predatory, appraising glint in their eyes. It made my skin crawl. He was seeing Erica, a pretty girl, a potential conquest. He wasn't seeing me. I'm fine, I stammered, my voice coming out as a weak, feminine squeak that only seemed to encourage him. "Nonsense," he bellowed, giving my shoulder a squeeze. "Come, have a drink with me and my friends. We'll show you a good time." He started to pull me toward a crowded table of equally loud, drunk men. Panic seized me. I twisted out of his grip, nearly dropping the precious cup. "No, thank you. I have to go." I scurried away, pushing blindly through the throng of people. I could hear his laughter behind me. The encounter left me shaken, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the unforgiving boning of the corset. This was my new reality. I was vulnerable in a way I had never, ever imagined. My first thought was to find Petra. She did this to me. She had to be able to undo it. I scanned the crowds, searching for her distinctive blonde braids and green dirndl, but it was impossible. The festival grounds were a sprawling maze of tents, stalls, and dancing people. She could be anywhere. She was probably gone. My friends, I had to find my friends, Jake, Sarah, Chris. They would help me. They had to. They saw me walk away with Petra. They'd know something was wrong. They would recognize me. Wouldn't they? I stumbled through the crowd, my long skirt feeling clumsy and foreign, catching on people's legs. I felt a dozen sets of eyes on me, some curious, some admiring, some leering. A group of college-age guys whistled as I passed. A woman smiled and told me my dirndl was beautiful. Each interaction was a fresh stab of surreal horror. They were all seeing the costume, the shell. No one saw the terrified man trapped inside. "You look lovely," someone said. "Smile, sweetheart," another called out. My face flushed with a mixture of shame and anger. I kept my head down, focusing on one thing, getting another sip of the beer down. I managed a small swallow, grimacing at the taste. It was torture. Finally, through a gap in the crowd, I saw them. My friends were still at the same table, laughing and drinking. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. I ran toward them, my steps awkward and unpracticed in the flimsy shoes. "Guys," I cried out, my voice thin and reedy. They looked up for a split second. I saw confusion on their faces, then something else. Jake's eyes widened, and a slow, appreciative grin spread across his face. He nudged Chris. "Well, hello," Jake said, his tone slick and flirtatious. He was looking at me the same way the drunk oaf had. "Can we help you?" My blood ran cold. "Jake, it's me," I said desperately. "It's Marcus." They all stared at me. Then Sarah burst out laughing. It wasn't a mean laugh, just one of pure amusement. "Oh, that's a good one. Are you trying to get a free beer? Marcus would get a huge kick out of this." "She's even got his cranky expression down," Chris added with a chuckle. They didn't recognize me. Of course, they didn't. Why would they? They were looking at a blonde girl in a dirndl, not their 25-year-old male friend. I looked nothing like him. I wasn't him anymore. "No, you don't understand." My voice rose with hysteria. Cracking. "The waitress, Petra, she gave me this beer and she—" I gestured frantically at my own body, at my face, my hair. "She turned me into this." Jake's smile faded, replaced by a look of pitying concern. "Whoa, hey now, you've had a bit too much to drink, haven't you? Sweetheart, maybe you should sit down." "I'm not drunk," I shrieked, tears starting to stream down my cheeks, smudging the faint makeup Petra must have applied. "It's me, Marcus. I complained about the plastic cups. And Sarah. You dared me to wear a dress, don't you remember?" They exchanged worried glances. This wasn't working. My explanation sounded insane. The ravings of a drunk girl. They saw a stranger having a breakdown. Chris, ever the well-meaning one, stood up and approached me cautiously, like I was a frightened animal. Okay, easy there. You're getting a little worked up. Look, why don't you give me that?" He pointed at the pink cup in my hand. "You've had enough for tonight." No, I clutched the cup to my chest protectively. "You don't understand. This is the only thing that can change me back. I have to drink it." I tried to take another gulp, but my vision was blurry with tears. The bitter liquid sloshed in the cup. The clock on the stage now read 9:58. 7 minutes left. "Look, I'm just trying to help," Chris said gently, his brow furrowed with genuine concern for this strange, hysterical girl. He reached for the cup. "Just let me get rid of it for you." "No, don't," I screamed, trying to back away. But my clumsy movement and the unfamiliar weight of my skirt betrayed me. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the hem, my arms pinwheeled for balance, and the pink cup flew from my grasp. It all happened in slow motion, the arc of the cup through the air, the splash of amber liquid scattering across the dusty floorboards, the final sickening crack as the plastic cup hit the ground and split open, its remaining contents bubbling into the dirt. The world went silent. The music, the laughter, the roar of the crowd, it all faded into a dull hum in my ears. I stared at the shattered pink plastic and the dark, spreading stain on the ground. My lifeline, my hope, my only way back to being Marcus. It was gone. A raw, ragged sob tore itself from my throat. It wasn't a man's cry of anger or frustration. It was the sound of pure, feminine despair. I sank to my knees, heedless of the dirt or the splintered wood, and wept. Chris and Jake and Sarah stood over me, their faces a mixture of shock and pity. They didn't understand what they had just done. They didn't see a friend whose life they had just inadvertently sealed. They just saw a poor drunk girl who had dropped her drink. 2 festival security guards were already heading our way, their expressions stern. My friends started trying to explain, but I didn't hear them. All I could hear was the faint melodic chime of the tiny silver bell in my hair, a sound that now felt less like a promise and more like a funeral toll. The security guards were surprisingly gentle. They helped me to my feet, their large hands firm on my elbows, murmuring calming, meaningless phrases like, "It's all right, miss, and let's get you some water." They saw my heaving sobs, my disheveled appearance, the dirndl now smudged with dirt from the floor, and drew the obvious conclusion: a tourist who couldn't handle her liquor. I tried to look back at my friends, to send one last, desperate plea with my eyes, but they were already turning away, looking embarrassed and uncomfortable. From their perspective, a crazy drunk girl had accosted them, and now she was being dealt with. They were probably relieved. The thought was a fresh, twisting knife in my already shattered heart. They led me away from the noise and lights of the festival, down a series of quiet, sterile corridors behind the main tents. The thumping polka music faded, replaced by the distant hum of generators and the cold, institutional buzz of fluorescent lights. We ended up in a small bare room designated as a first aid and sobering up station. It contained nothing more than a few plastic chairs, a cot, and a water cooler. The air smelled of antiseptic and regret. One of the guards, a burly man with a kind, tired face, sat me down in one of the chairs. "Just take a seat here for a while. Miss, catch your breath. Someone will be with you shortly." Then they left, closing the door behind them and leaving me in the stark, humming silence. Alone, the word had never felt so heavy, so absolute. I sat there, numb, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. The frantic terror of the past hour began to recede, replaced by a deep, hollow ache that settled in the pit of my stomach. It was over. The beer was gone. The deadline was meaningless now. 10:05 p.m. would come and go, and nothing would change. This body, this face, this life, it was mine now, forever. Slowly, as if in a trance, I began to take stock of my new reality. I wiggled my toes inside the simple leather shoes. They felt small, delicate. I ran my hands down the heavy fabric of the skirt, the texture of the weave rough against my smooth palms. The corset still held me in its unyielding grip, a constant, physical reminder of my new shape. I took a shaky breath and the tight bodice strained, the swell of my breast pressing against the fabric. It wasn't a costume anymore. It was just my clothes. My hands drifted up to my face. I traced the line of a jaw that was too soft, fingers brushing against lips that felt too full. Then my hands went to my hair. It was soft and fine, cascading over my shoulders as my fingers tangled in the blonde strands. They brushed against the tiny metal object clipped behind my ear. The bell. A flicker of a memory, a phantom sound, echoed in my mind. Petra's voice. Erica has no such luxury. Erica feels everything. I pushed myself up from the chair and walked on unsteady legs to a small, metal frame mirror hanging on the wall. I braced myself and looked. The girl in the mirror was a wreck. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess. Her face was blotchy and tear-streaked, and a smear of lipstick, when had that even gotten there, was smudged across her cheek. Her blue eyes, wide and red-rimmed, stared back at me with an expression of profound, bottomless loss. I was looking for Marcus in those eyes, a flicker of him, a ghost of the man I used to be. But I couldn't find him. All I saw was her, this strange, sad girl, Erica. A wave of something new washed over me, something beyond the panic and the grief. It was a strange, terrifying sense of permanence. This wasn't a temporary state. This wasn't a nightmare I was going to wake up from. This was my body, my face. The door opened, and a woman in a paramedic's uniform came in. She had a kind, professional smile. "Feeling any better?" "Hon," she asked, holding a clipboard. "That was quite a scene you caused out there." I just stared at her, unable to form words. "We just need to get some basic information for our report," she said gently. "Can you tell me your name?" My throat went dry. My mind screamed the answer. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm 25 years old. I'm a man. This is all a horrible mistake." I opened my mouth, ready to fight, to scream the truth one last time, no matter how insane it sounded, but the sound that came out was just a choked whisper. The name felt alien on my tongue, yet it was the only one that seemed to fit the face in the mirror, the body I inhabited. Erica," I heard myself say. The paramedic nodded, writing it down. "And your last name, Erica." I had no answer. I had no last name, no history, no identity beyond this moment. She saw my confusion. "It's okay," she said soothingly. "Can you remember where you're from, who you came with?" I shook my head, fresh tears beginning to fall. I came with friends who no longer knew me. I came from a life that no longer existed. I was adrift. She put a comforting hand on my shoulder. The touch was meant to be reassuring, but it only amplified the profound sense of dislocation I felt. I wasn't just in a different body. I was in a different world, one where I was utterly alone. I listened to the faint, distant sounds of the festival winding down the final song from the band, the cheers of the crowd as the last keg was tapped. The clock tower in the center of town began to chime, its deep, resonant bells marking the hour, 10 o'clock, then the single chime for 5 minutes past. 10:05 p.m. The deadline had passed. The door had closed. I touched the tiny bell in my hair. It didn't chime. It was just a small, cold piece of silver. Its purpose was finished. As I stood there under the cold, humming lights of the sober-up room, I felt a fundamental shift inside me, a quiet, final click of a lock turning. The part of me that had been screaming, fighting, hoping for a way back, finally went silent. It was a kind of death, and in its place, something else began to stir. Not acceptance, not yet, but a dawning, terrifying realization. Marcus was gone. And Erica was just beginning. I must have sat in that sterile little room for over an hour, lost in a silent gray fog of shock. The kind paramedic had given me a bottle of water and a granola bar, both of which sat untouched on the plastic chair beside me. She tried to ask me more questions, but my answers were monosyllabic whispers or vacant shakes of my head. Eventually, she sighed and left me alone, promising to check back in later. In the quiet, I began to notice things, the subtle scent of my own skin, a faint floral sweetness that was completely unfamiliar, the way my breath was short and shallow, dictated by the unyielding corset, the soft weight of my hair on my neck and shoulders. Each new sensation was a small, sharp reminder that this was real. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was being joined by something else, a cold, pragmatic fear. What was going to happen to me? I had no ID, no wallet, no phone. The pockets of Marcus's jeans, along with his entire existence, were gone. I was, for all intents and purposes, a non-person, a girl named Erica who had appeared out of nowhere at a festival. I wrapped my arms around myself, a gesture of self-comfort that felt alien with these slender arms and the unfamiliar obstruction of my breasts. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. I was truly, utterly alone. That's when the door opened again. I looked up, expecting the paramedic, but it was her. Petra. She stood silhouetted in the doorway, the brighter light of the hallway creating a halo effect around her braided blonde hair. She looked exactly the same calm, poised, her blue eyes holding that same unreadable depth. She held a small paper cup of what looked like tea. My numbness shattered, replaced by a fresh surge of raw, desperate anger. I shot to my feet. I choked out, my voice raw from crying. You did this to me. You have to change me back. She didn't flinch. She simply walked into the room, letting the door click softly shut behind her. She moved with that same eerie quietness, her presence filling the small space. She held the paper cup out to me. Chamomile, she said, her voice even and smooth. It will calm your nerves. I don't want to be calm, I screamed, my voice cracking. I slapped the cup from her hand. Hot tea splashed across the floor and onto the hem of my skirt, but I barely felt it. I want my life back. Why did you do this to me? Petra looked down at the spilled tea, then back up at me. Her expression wasn't angry or defensive. It was pitying. You had your chance to go back. Erica, she said softly, you had the cup in your hand, but you chose to run. You chose to panic. My friend knocked it out of my hand, I sobbed. He didn't know. It wasn't my fault. Wasn't it? Petra's voice was gentle, but her words were like steel. You spent all night complaining that this festival was fake, that everyone was just playing a part. You scoffed at them because you saw yourself as superior, as more real, but you are the most dishonest one of all. Marcus. Hearing my old name from her lips was a physical blow. What are you talking about? You built walls of sarcasm and cynicism around yourself so you would never have to feel anything. She continued, taking a step closer. Her gaze was hypnotic. You were afraid of joy, afraid of looking foolish, afraid of being vulnerable. You lived your life as a spectator, judging everyone else's performance, so I gave you a starring role, one you couldn't run from. The anger in me began to curdle, replaced by a confusing, dawning horror. Her words, as cruel as they were, rang with a terrible truth. I was always on the outside, always complaining, always finding fault. It was easier than actually participating. You think turning me into a woman is some kind of lesson, I whispered, horrified. Marcus was the one who drank the beer and made the boast. Petra said, her eyes boring into mine. Erica is the one who feels the consequences. She feels fear, she feels vulnerability, she feels despair. The festival doesn't need another cynical spectator. Erica, it needs people who are willing to feel. It needs a heart that is open, even if it's breaking. Tears streamed down my face again, but they were different now. They weren't just tears of loss for Marcus, but tears of terror for Erica, for this new person who was being forced to exist, stripped bare of all my defenses. Please, I begged, my fight gone, replaced by a hollow desperation. I'll do anything. I've learned my lesson. Just change me back. Petra shook her head slowly, a deep sadness in her eyes. It doesn't work that way. The magic has settled. The choice was made the moment that cup broke. Marcus is a memory now. Erica is the reality. The finality in her voice was absolute. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a verdict. She walked over to the desk where the paramedic had left her clipboard. She picked up a pen and looked at the form. In the blank space for the patient's name, she neatly wrote Erica Musterman. Musterman, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It's a common placeholder name, like John Doe. She explained without looking up, a name for someone with no past. You are a tourist who drank too much and can't remember where she came from. The festival staff will arrange for you to be taken to a local women's shelter for the night. From there, your life is your own to build. She placed the pen down. My future a blank. terrifying document signed with a fake name. A women's shelter. What would I do? How would I live? Petra turned to leave. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob, and looked back at me one last time. Her expression had softened. "Don't mourn Marcus for too long. Erica," she said, her voice barely audible. "He was a cage. You, at least, have a chance to be free." And then she was gone. A few minutes later, the kindly paramedic returned with a police officer. They looked at the clipboard, at the name Petra had written. They spoke to me in soft, simple terms, as if to a child. They told me they were taking me somewhere safe for the night. As they led me out of the festival grounds and toward a waiting car, the cool night air felt strange against my skin. I could smell the lingering scent of popcorn and damp earth. The festival was over. The lights were being turned off, one by one. Just before I got into the car, I looked back toward the darkened tents. In the distance, standing under a single working streetlight, I saw a silhouette. It was Petra. She was holding a single, bright pink plastic cup, the same kind she had given me. She raised it into the air, a solitary, silent toast to the empty festival grounds. Then, for the last time, I heard the clear, gentle chime of the tiny silver bell in my hair. It wasn't a curse or a countdown anymore. It sounded like a beginning, the sound of a new life. Whether I wanted it or not, the birth of Erica. The women's shelter was called Haven House. The name felt like a cruel joke. It was a clean but impersonal place, with linoleum floors that squeaked under my unfamiliar shoes and walls painted a faded, institutional yellow. The woman at the front desk, a tired-looking but kind woman named Maria, didn't ask too many questions. Petra's story, or rather, my new official story of being a disoriented tourist who had lost her memory, was plausible enough in a town that swelled with strangers every autumn. They gave me a small, private room with a narrow bed, a thin blanket, and a small dresser. They also gave me a care package containing a toothbrush, a bar of soap, and a plain oversized gray t-shirt and sweatpants to sleep in. Closing the door to my room, the solitude was absolute. The first thing I did was take off the dirndl. Undoing the laces of the bodice and the corset felt like being freed from a beautiful, elaborate prison. As the stays loosened, I took my first truly deep breath of the day, and the relief was so profound it made me dizzy. I peeled off the layers of clothing, the skirt, the chemise, the stockings, until I was standing in just the simple cotton panties Petra had put me in. I caught my reflection in the small, cracked mirror above the dresser. For a long moment, I just stared, taking in the full reality of my new form without the artifice of the costume. Slender shoulders, a narrow waist that flared into gently curved hips, long, smooth legs, and my chest. The sight of my own breasts, small but perfectly formed, was still a jarring shock. This was me now. This body was my home. Stripping off the last of my borrowed undergarments, I stepped into the tiny ensuite bathroom's shower. The hot water was a balm, washing away the dirt, the sweat, and the lingering scent of beer and tears. As I washed this new body, it was a strange, disconnected process. I was exploring an unknown country with a bar of soap. Every curve, every patch of soft skin was a discovery. It wasn't arousing or exciting. It was clinical, terrifying, and profoundly sad. I was a ghost inhabiting a stranger's flesh. I slept in fits and starts, haunted by dreams of my old life. I saw my friends' faces, heard my own deep, familiar laughter. I dreamt of playing basketball, the comfortable weight of the ball in my large hands. I woke up with a silent scream lodged in my throat, my hands instinctively going to my chest, only to find the soft mounds of flesh that confirmed the nightmare was real. The next morning, Maria gave me some clothes from the shelter's donation bin, a pair of faded jeans that were a little too loose in the waist but fit my new hips, a soft faded blue t-shirt, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Dressed in these simple modern clothes, I looked less like a festival character and more like an ordinary young woman. It was somehow even more disturbing. The dirndl had felt like a costume I could one day take off. The jeans and t-shirt felt like an acceptance. Maria sat me down with a cup of coffee and explained the shelter's rules. They could house me for up to 30 days. They would help me try to recover my memory. which meant contacting the police to file a missing persons report under the name Erica Musterman. They had counselors and resources to help me get back on my feet. "We can help you get a new ID, a social security number," she explained patiently. "It's a long process for people who've lost everything, but it's not impossible. The first step is just to rest." I nodded, my mind reeling. A new ID, a new name, a new life, constructed from scratch. The first few days were a blur of quiet desperation. I spent most of my time in my room, afraid to interact with the other women at the shelter. They were all escaping their own horrors: abusive partners, financial ruin, addiction. My story, if I were to tell it, would sound like pure fantasy. So I remained the quiet, amnesiac girl, Erica. I was learning to be her. I learned how to walk without tripping over my own feet, a strange new center of gravity to master. I learned to modulate my voice, to speak in the softer, higher register that was now natural to me. Instead of trying to force the baritone that was no longer there, I learned to deal with the 1,000 tiny indignities and practicalities of being a woman the way men on the street would look at me. The monthly cycle that my body was apparently already on. A sudden and cramping revelation that left me curled on my bed in miserable pain. One afternoon, about a week after the festival, I mustered the courage to walk back into town. I kept my head down, a donated baseball cap pulled low over my blonde hair. My heart hammered in my chest with every step. I was terrified of running into Marcus's friends. I walked past the coffee shop where we used to hang out. Through the window, I saw them, Jake, Sarah, and Chris, sitting at our usual table. They were laughing about something on Jake's phone. Sarah was wearing her normal clothes now, the blue dirndl gone. The festival was over. Life had moved on, for them. Marcus was probably just gone. Maybe they thought I'd just packed up and left town without a word. A flaky move that wouldn't be entirely out of character for my old, cynical self. Would they even miss me? Or was I just the complainer, the buzzkill, whose absence was a quiet relief? The thought was so painful I had to turn away, leaning against a brick wall in an alleyway, my breath catching in my throat. I was watching my own life from across the street, a ghost at the funeral. As I stood there, trembling, a man walking past the alley slowed his pace. "Hey, you okay, sweetheart? Need some help?" I flinched at the familiar, unwanted overture. "I'm fine," I said, my voice tight. He didn't move on. "You sure you look upset? A pretty girl like you shouldn't be crying all alone." He took a step into the alley. It wasn't aggressive, not yet, but it was presumptive. It was the same energy as the drunk at the festival, the same casual ownership in his gaze, in my old body. This man wouldn't have given me a second glance. Now I was a thing to be approached, to be assessed, to be helped. The fear and grief that had been choking me for a week finally found an outlet. It coalesced into a hot, white spike of rage. "Leave me alone," I snarled, my head snapping up. I met his eyes, and for the first time, I didn't let my gaze falter. I didn't try to hide or shrink away. I let him see the raw, undiluted fury in my face. He was taken aback, his confident smirk faltering. "Whoa, okay, lady, just trying to be nice." He put his hands up in a placating gesture and quickly backed away, disappearing down the street. I was left alone in the alley, my body shaking, my heart racing not from fear but from adrenaline. It was a small victory, a tiny one, but it was mine. I hadn't been a helpless victim. I had found my voice, Erica's voice, and used it. Something inside me shifted. Petra's words came back to me. Marcus was a cage. You, at least, have a chance to be free. Maybe she was right. Marcus had been trapped in his own head, in his own negativity. He would never have been able to feel the profound loss I was feeling now, but he also wouldn't have been able to feel that fierce, protective spark of rage. He observed life. Erica was being forced to live it, in all its messy, painful, terrifying glory. I didn't have a past anymore. My old life was a photograph I could look at but never re-enter. My future was a terrifying, blank page, but in that moment, standing in that grimy alley, having stared down a stranger and won, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt since I'd taken that first sip of beer. It wasn't happiness, it wasn't acceptance, it was a tiny, fragile seed of defiance, a sense that maybe, just maybe, Erica Musterman could be more than just a name on a form. Maybe she could be a survivor. I pulled the baseball cap lower, took a deep breath, and walked out of the alley. I didn't know where I was going. For the first time, that felt less like a terror and more like a possibility. The story of Marcus was over, finished in a warehouse filled with dust and magic. The story of Erica was just beginning. On a quiet street in a small town, with a single, defiant step forward,